All right. So we are you're all informed and all caught up on everything. And so now we'll get ready to jump into this conversation. So Janae posted comments in the chat too. That's not the way this is supposed to work. Anyway.
I just want to talk in the chat.
So sharing is caring. You can like and share this conversation. Especially if you know someone that would be interested in hearing about this journey. You can do that. So anyway, obviously the reason that we're having this conversation is because Church on Purpose is actually preparing to turn 5 years old. Church on Purpose is going to be 5 in October. And so we've been here in Nebraska now for 4 or 5 years. It was 5 years in August that our family has been here. And I mean, it's crazy, but it still feels like we're very new to Nebraska. Mm-hmm. But it feels like we've been here a long time. Mm-hmm. It feels like we're new to Nebraska, but it feels like we've been gone from Virginia for a while. And so I don't know. I think it sometimes gets hard to really be able to kind of put everything into context because the timing just seems so off. And then I think 2020 really threw off everything in terms of like understanding concepts of time and all that kind of stuff. And so tonight, we're just going to kind of walk back through and hopefully be able to provide some additional perspective that you all don't normally get. I'm going to try to venture into some areas that I don't ordinarily get to when I do the vision dinner presentation, or usually when it comes up generally in our conversations during the preaching moments. And so I mean, let's jump in. So I think the best place to start is kind of giving people context about what life was like before the call. So you can share a little bit about that.
So before we moved and before Jonathan got the call to move to Omaha and launch Church on Purpose, we lived in Norfolk, Virginia. And we attended a wonderful church called Gethsemane Community Fellowship Baptist Church. Yes, that is a very long name, but we call it the Garden. And in the Garden, we were able to bloom. We were able to grow in our skills and our knowledge of the word, not only in the knowledge of the word, but like I said, in our skills and our ability to lead. And that's one thing that I appreciated about that ministry was that they nurtured that and they helped us to be the people that we are today for our ministry. And so there, Jonathan and I kind of served in different capacities. For me, I was in the choir, praise and worship leader. At first, it was just the nursery ministry, but moved up to being the children's ministry leader over about 300 kids. Yeah, it was a lot of kids. And after that, of course, teaching there. And just eventually we had a baby named David. And it got very intense with a lot of things that we had going on in our lives as far as in ministry life. So being able to juggle ministry and family was a bit much for us at the time. And so I'll stop there. And you want to?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was really I think if there were defining moments along the journey, David's birth was kind of one of those first defining moments for us. Mm-hmm. And just kind of everything that was going on around that time, because that David was born in 2011. And we always talk about the housing crisis of 2008 and all that kind of stuff, but the impacts and the effects of the housing crisis really didn't hit for like 2 or 3 years for most people. And so it was right. I mean, literally like within a couple of months after we got married in 2010, that that things started getting tough for me in business. At the time, I was working with a friend of mine, and we had a very successful international business. And but we got hit by the impacts of the housing crisis. And I'll never forget. We were doing really well. I mean, well enough to where I was, after being quote unquote homeless twice. Um, Finally having enough money and enough stability to be able to get my own spot, get my own place. I knew that was definitely a checkbox that I needed to check before I asked her to marry me. And and so you can't have somebody marry you and you living over top of somebody else's garage. It just doesn't work like that.
Very true.
So was able to get my own spot. Everything was cool. Like we weren't like balling out of control or whatever, but
We were
she was making
comfortable.
good money. I was making good money. It looked like everything was going to be great. And we got married in a couple of months. I mean, literally a couple of months, like 3 months, 3-4 months after we got married, she said that she was pregnant with David. And
Surprise.
and it ended up being a high risk pregnancy. And
Yes.
so around, what was that, maybe month like 6 going into 7,
Yeah.
she got put on bed rest. And so so she wasn't working during that time. And prior to that, she was working part-time anyway. And so by not being at work because she was on bed rest, then that cut out that segment of our income. And then the money that was coming in from my job, like I said, like our business started struggling. And literally 2 months before David was born, we had to shut the company down. So 2 months before our first child comes into the world, we don't have any income. And it was a really scary time. It was a really tough time for me, being a new husband, getting ready to be a new father, and having lost my job and like trying to find work. And at that time, everybody was trying to find work, and it just was not, it just was not working. And it was a really tough time. We went through some really difficult days.
Emotionally, just spiritually,
Yeah.
relationship wise.
Yeah, I mean it's already enough like being in a marriage, but then being in a marriage being in a brand new marriage with a brand new baby, and then being in a brand new marriage with a brand new baby, and you got no money coming in the house, and you trying to figure out how you gonna get the bills paid and be able to eat each day. It was really tough. It was really tough. There was one night that I'll never forget, where like 2-3 o'clock in the morning, like we hear somebody honking the horn, and like, what is this person doing? Like, what's going on? And so I get up to go look out the window, and the tow truck, the repo man, got Janae's car jacked up on the tow truck. And I'm like, dang. But he was outside honking the horn because he said he had looked in the back seat and he saw like the baby seat and he saw like all the baby stuff on the inside. And so he wanted to give us an opportunity to be able to get the stuff out of the car before he took it. And I would have to say that was probably one of the lowest points of my life, was at 3 o'clock in the morning with these bright tow truck lights shining, to have to go outside and clean all this stuff out of her car to then watch him pull off and take her car down the street. There aren't many moments in life where you feel like more of a failure. And so that was tough, and it took some working through those things. But God definitely ended up using that season to, of being together with David, especially in those early days, use that season to help us to really figure out what kind of family we wanted to be. And, to Janae's point earlier about just finding that balance, it was the clarity that we had about the kind of family that we wanted, that helped me to make some tough decisions even in ministry, because like she was saying, she was heavily involved in ministry. I was the youth pastor at the church for nearly 5 years, and things were going really great, but I eventually, of course, I was able to get another job, and I was working a full-time job while also doing youth ministry, and also had this kid at home. And there was one week in the summer that I think would be another hallmark moment during that time, where I went a full 3 days without seeing David awake. And after that, I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I can't go to work and be working with kids, and then go to church and be working with kids, and not be able, and build relationships with and connect with and help build up everybody else's kids. And my own kid doesn't know me. And of course, by this time, David was only a couple of months old. And I was thinking about just kind of all of the moments that I would miss out on by not being there. And so, it was at that time where I had to make a decision. I was like, am I going to keep my job and let ministry go? Or am I going to, keep ministry and let my job go or whatever? And, was hoping to be able to, to be on staff at the church, but that didn't work out. And so I had to go with the option that was going to pay our bills. And so I walked away from youth ministry, and fortunately the opportunity opened up to start playing the bass at the church. And so I was a church bass. I went from being the youth pastor to being the bass player, and played bass at the church for a little over a year, and learned a lot about one aspect of ministry that I hadn't served in, but always knew that there was going to be an opportunity to re-engage in ministry in some way, shape, or form. And so during that time, like, while I'm playing the bass and David is growing, and then of course, a couple years after that, we find out that Jada is on her way. We start having conversations about, the feasibility of relocating. And, I started kind of getting the bug again to get back into youth ministry, and had a couple of friends that were talking about potential youth ministry openings. And so we were looking at moving, potentially as far away as Maryland, to be able to continue serving in ministry, but being able to do so full time. And so it was really weird just how God kind of set all that stuff up, because we started having conversations about what it would look like to move, before the Church on Purpose piece ever came down the pipe. We had actually started having those conversations and kind of exploring that. And I mean, you, of course, were at Gethsemane a lot longer than I was. And so that disconnection was going to be a lot more for you. So I guess you can talk a little bit about what was going through your head when we were having those initial conversations.
So initially I was thinking, well, Janae, you did marry into it. You already knew that you were marrying a preacher. So eventually, most likely, because his dad is a pastor, he most likely will be a pastor too. And with understanding that going into the marriage, it made it a lot smoother for me. I think I was able to adjust when we started talking about possibly moving, because I already knew that I wasn't going to be at my home church for long, because I married a preacher, and a darn good one at that. And so I already knew that, hands down, we're going to move. I didn't think we were going to move this far.
I don't think anybody that. I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning and is like, hey, we should move to Nebraska.
I don't think I had that in mind. I just knew that I was not going to be at my home church for long or whatever. So I was okay with that when we started initially having those conversations. I was actually excited because like you said, not said, but like you say a lot of times is, you should find somewhere where you can grow. And once you outgrow that church, it's okay. You can move on to somewhere else where you can continue to grow. I don't know. You didn't say it in those exact words.
Close enough.
But I'm just saying.
Thank
you for giving my props. But yeah, so, I knew that I was outgrowing that space. And it was time for me to grow a little bit more. So yeah. I was excited when he was like, "Hey, what do you think about, possibly going such and such?" It's like, okay. So yeah, when I guess you're gonna go into the night that you woke up.
Well, yeah, that would have been in the past. That would have been the same year that David was born in 2011. Um, Crazy enough, in 2011. So in 2011, my family, we did Thanksgiving together at a lake house at Smith Mountain Lake. And on the drive up there, Janae was asleep, but
I'm always asleep.
I was talking on the phone to one of my great friends, Edgar Smart, one of my best men from the wedding. He does all the graphic work for Church on Purpose. So amazingly talented and gifted dude. If you need some work, hit him up. And then you can get it printed by Abundant Faith and Joy, Anise and Gerald A. Dale
Nice
at Church on
plug.
Purpose. I'm telling you, we got wraparound services for you coming to Church on Purpose. But I was talking to Edgar, and we were having this really interesting conversation just about like the state of church and what church was what church was like, how church could be different. Was church losing its relevance in the community? Why does it seem like so many people have so many issues with church? What are some of the barriers that prevent us from really being able to represent Christ in a way that that makes people feel good about the faith, as opposed to kind of what have become some of the common social reflections and responsibilities. And representations. And in that conversation, and this is a part that I don't talk about often, but in that conversation, it just really got me thinking, do we really even understand why we do the things that we do? Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of stuff that we do in church that we just do because people either told us to do it, or because we've seen other people do it, or because we think this is what we're supposed to be doing. And that was kind of when I started thinking critically about whether or not we even know why we're doing the things that we're doing. Mm-hmm. And if we don't know why we're doing the things that we're doing, how can we really expect to produce the outcomes that we're looking for if we're just going along blindly with things? Right. Power comes from knowledge. And you are empowered when you understand why you're doing the things that you're doing. But as an organization, you're also empowered when you have the opportunity to evaluate why you do the things that you do. Because if you know why you do the things that you do, then you can stop doing the things that you don't need to do anymore. Right. But if you don't know why you do the things that you do, then you're liable to fall into that trap of continuing to do things that are completely and totally irrelevant. And so it was a really, really rich, really deep conversation. And so then a couple weeks later, matter of fact, a month later, Christmas morning of 2011 at 2:30 in the morning, I wake up out of my sleep, and the only thing that I see in my head is Church on Purpose. And I mean, like, wake up, like eyes open, sit up in the bed, and the only thing that's like in my mind is the words Church on Purpose. And that was it. Lay back down, went back to sleep, got up and had Christmas or whatever. The only time that Church on Purpose really kind of ended up showing its face again, because at that time I was still serving in youth ministry. I would serve in youth ministry for about 2 years after that. But it really made me start thinking more critically about our approach to ministry and whether or not we knew why we did the things that we did. And more importantly, whether or not the kids understood why we did the things that we did in church. And so I think that was a time in youth ministry where we kind of made a turn and started trying to be really intentional about helping children to understand, this is why you engage in praise and worship. This is why you pray. This is why service is structured the way that it is. This is why things are the way that they are, so that they would begin to grow up with an understanding of what's happening in worship and what's going on in worship, so that it's not just stuff that you do,
Yeah.
but it's stuff that you understand.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I think that really helped a lot of the youth. Like we're still friends with a lot of them. A lot of them are married or either have children, or they're
Hey,
getting
Carolyn
ready to
Jones.
graduate, and they talk about how their lives were impacted by the team, the youth ministry team, and how we made intentional choices and to show them, what worship looked like, why they're doing it, how they should do it, and talked about why to ask questions, not just to do things, just to do them, but to ask questions on why it's okay. And so a lot of them till this day, they keep up with that same rhythm of asking the questions of why, and and learning how to do things for a purpose and for a reason, and it kind of helped them to understand their purpose and their value here on earth. So yeah, we it has shown tremendous growth in a lot of the kids that we know.
Yeah. And I think one of the most valuable lessons that I think I learned in ministry, it took a little while, but I think one of the more valuable lessons that I learned in ministry is that, what my dad always says, you can learn something from anybody. You can either learn what to do or what not to do. And you can also learn from every situation as well, because situations can either help you to learn what to do or what not to do. And I think that situation, serving as the youth pastor there at the church, helped me to learn and to understand that every idea isn't necessarily for the moment that you get the idea in. Sometimes the Spirit gives you ideas and expands your creativity so that you can begin thinking about what it would look like to be able to do that on a different scale. And there was a lot of things that I thought about while I was working in youth ministry at Gethsemane that that we've applied to Church on Purpose, and in a large way helped to shape the kind of church that we've become. And youth ministry kind of became that space that I was able to begin testing out some of those ideas. I think one of the more impactful ones is the declaration service. At Church on Purpose, we attach, when someone joins the church, we attach a moment of testimony to a moment of baptism. And that was an outgrowth of a declaration service that we did with some of our teenagers at the church that I think even all these years later still ends up being one of my favorite worship services at the church, because it was children, young people, youth standing up and being honest about their life and how they came to Christ and what they expected to be different about their journey. And it was a really powerful night. But it gave me an opportunity to really kind of shift my perspective on ministry. But even at that time, I was never thinking about going and starting a church. Like I said, by the time we kind of got into 2013, 2014, we were having conversations about what it would look like to move and for me to be working full time in ministry. But, wasn't nobody thinking about planting no church until August of 2014. When one of my great friends, one of my best friends, Anthony Stark, now Dr. Stark, he was starting his PhD program at the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and he asked me if I would help him drive the moving truck, and I was like, cool. At the time I had already put in my 2 weeks notice. Well, actually, I was getting ready to put in my 2 weeks notice for my job at the rec center, because I was starting a consultation business that was going to start helping other people to get their businesses off the ground and kind of coach them through that process. And so I was like, cool, this could be a good opportunity to be able to get away from everything during this moment of transition in my life. And so, he was like, yeah, ride out. You don't have to worry about anything, and I hope you get back home and all that kind of stuff. And so that was the equivalent of like my first vacation since our honeymoon. I don't go on vacations often.
No, you don't.
It's always work trips and business and everything. But when it came time for him to leave, we got in the truck and we had 19 and a half hours ahead of us, and we started having conversations, and all of our conversations started developing this common theme of purpose, and and the kind of mark that we wanted to leave on the world. And I mean, we got to a Wendy's in Richmond, Virginia, and we met this little old lady that was in line in front of us. And, I just started having conversation with her, and she started talking about how she had taught public school for like 60, 70 years. And she talked about how she had taught like multiple generations, of families, and how she really doesn't go anywhere in the city where she doesn't see somebody that is either a student or the grandchild or child of a student or whatever, and how much joy it brought her when she had former students come back and tell her that they went into teaching because of her example, because she was a great teacher. And it made me start thinking like, wow, what kind of deposit can I make in other people's lives that helps them define their path? And so, so we're engaging in dialogue, conversation, all that kind of stuff. We finally make it to Omaha, and we end up going to church on Sunday morning, we end up going to church on Sunday morning. And at the end of the service, Anthony goes down and he joins the church. And I'm like, what in the world are you doing? Because you just moved here. This is the first time that we've ever been to this church. And honestly, we spent like the entire service engaging in ministry analysis. We were critiquing everything from the music to the program to everything else. And the really uncomfortable welcome song with the man in the orange suit that was gyrating in front of me. We were analyzing all of these things about the service, and then at the end of the service, he ends up going down and joining the church. And so it was like, what are you doing? So he got his little new members packet. In the new members packet was a copy of Revive magazine, interestingly enough, published by my now boss, Willie Barney at the Empowerment Network, and the business that he has with his wife, Yolanda Barney, Revive Omaha. So, establishing connections already. Well, in the back of it's after church. And so we were looking for somewhere to go. And what up, Taryn Albagati?
Taryn! That's one of the youth.
So we were... it was after church, and so had to go get something to eat. So flip to the back of the book, and there's this ad, and I'm like, well, that lady looks like she knows how to cook. And it was an ad for Big Mama's Kitchen and Catering. So we find the restaurant, we go, and we sit down and we order our food and we eat and everything. And the food was knock your socks off, amazing. Great food. Definitely wasn't expecting that. And so as we're finishing, Big Mama comes out of the kitchen and she starts like walking around. We're sitting at if you guys remember the old dining room at the previous location, we're sitting at the table that's closest to the register. And so she comes out and she goes all the way to the end of the dining room and then starts working her way back in conversation with people. And so even though me and Anthony were done eating, we were like, no, we got to hang around because we got to get an opportunity to be able to talk to this lady because the food is amazing. And so she finally makes it to our table and she pulls up a chair and she sits down, and I mean the food blessed me so much that I had to slide out of my seat, get down on one knee and propose. And that was the day that I asked Big Mama to marry me. And she laughed. She looked at me like I was crazy. And then she told me no, but in a very, very polite way. And I was like, well, I guess that's kind of convenient because I kind of am already married. And, my wife back home probably wouldn't be too enthusiastic about that. But she, she sat there and she stayed with us. And we talked, and while she spent maybe like 2 or 3 minutes at everybody else's table, she ended up spending 4 hours with us, and we had this 4-hour conversation about her life and about how she came to begin cooking and when she knew that she was a cook and how she loved cooking and how she used food to bring people together, how the power that she saw in food and the gift that she saw that she had for being able to cook and to use food to bring people together, and told some really amazing stories. And the whole time she's talking, I'm sitting there like, well, what is that one thing that I love to do like that, that by me doing could make a difference in somebody else's life? And I'm trying to, I'm trying to figure it out. And over that 4 hour conversation, I just knew that I had to figure out what that was. Well, this is, and that's Anthony for anybody that may not know.
Look how small
But
you were.
and then I got out here and started eating Big Mama's Kitchen every other weekend, and now look at the way I do now. But it was an amazing conversation, so amazing that I begged her to see if we could come back and continue the conversation. So she said, yeah. So we set a date to come back on Wednesday. And literally, I mean, when I left, I planned on coming out there to relax and think about my business, but I couldn't think about anything else besides like what I am purposed to do. And so, I mean, anybody that knows Anthony knows that he is a tremendously intelligent, tremendously gifted individual. I mean, the dude is amazing. And we have been able to build a kind of friendship to where we knew just kind of how to work together. And so he knew, like, he could see the wheels turning. I mean, he even, he was asking his own questions, but he could see the wheels turning for me. And we spent like that night just up talking until like early hours of the morning, just asking questions and processing and thinking about life and thinking about her conversation and what similar kind of checkpoints and point, and moments like lined up with our experience. And it would be 2 days before I realized that I was a coach. I love coaching. Mm-hmm. And that's why, sometimes y'all call me coach at church. Up until, well, we'll talk about that later. But I'm a coach. I love coaching. I love identifying challenges and formulating strategies to overcome them, and then empowering people to be able to work together to overcome those obstacles. I'm a coach. I love coaching. And it's something that I've seen in all different stages of my life. I mean, in high school, they called me Coach Chapman because I spent more time working with my teammates than I did doing my own stuff in running track, indoor and outdoor. And so it was natural for me. And I realized that for a lot of my life, I had limited that coaching concept to everything else and never realized that I could apply it in church. And so when I realized that I was a coach, when I had that revelation that I'm a coach, I love coaching. Then the possibilities for how I could engage in coaching it opened up so many avenues and so many doors. But as that week was going on, there were 3 little words that started growing in my mind. And it was those words, church on purpose. Now, mind you, I'm in Nebraska while all this is going on. Janae's at home with 2 kids at that time. So before I get to the next part of the story, you can kind of talk about what you were doing with the kids at home while I was gone.
Trying to stay sane.
It was the first time I'd ever been gone.
It was.
With the kids. So
yeah, it was the very first time. So trying to juggle being a mother, leading worship, working, because at the time I was doing I was a home provider, so childcare home provider at the time too as well. But it was a lot. But I knew that he needed to go on this trip. He needed to go do something other than what he was doing at home. So while I was struggling and turning more gray up there, I was kind of glad to be home, 1, with the kids, and 2, know that he was okay. I kind of bugged him throughout the trip because, that's what wives do. We want to hear from him, ever so often.
She want to make sure I won't out here proposing to people in Nebraska.
That's right, because he is married. He is taken. But anywho, but yeah, so I mean, I was just waiting patiently for him to come home and tell me all the good things that he did and what he learned and what he did on his trip.
Yeah, so what ended up happening was we went back and had another conversation with Patricia Big Mama Barron, and that second conversation was she was really giving a lot of insight into Omaha and the challenges that Omaha was experiencing, especially among the Black community here, and the kind of obstacles that people have been working together to try to overcome, and just identifying kind of some areas that she felt like the community could use some help. And it was really weird because, I mean, as she was talking, it just felt like it was a lot of connecting of dots, and, you know, just as it relates to kind of what the kind of mindset that I already had for ministry anyway. And so we sat with her for another 4 hours on that Wednesday. Phenomenal conversation, phenomenal food. And when we left, it was a really heavy day because I was leaving to go back home on Thursday. This was Wednesday. And so I spent a lot of time during that week journaling and kind of making notes about kind of what I was thinking and what was going on. But when I left there, the words church on purpose in my brain had gone from like that small to like that big. And so now it's like, okay, I know who I am. I know like what my gifting is. But how am I supposed to use it? And all I'm getting is church on purpose. And it's just like, well, no, that obviously can't mean what I think it means. It has to mean something else. And so, you know, I keep kind of pushing it to the side until Thursday, when it's time for me to leave and it's time to go. And, you know, and I'm like really wrestling at this point because I'm feeling the weight of needing to make a decision about something before I leave. And so we get in the car, and Anthony, he's taking me to a couple of other places that he knows about in town, just doing a little bit of sightseeing before I go to the airport. But he wants me to drive, and I'm just like, all right, whatever, you know, I'll drive. But he's navigating, and when I drive, not only the way that I drive, but the way I live my life is, I really love knowing what's next, so that I can prepare myself adequately for what's going to happen. So I'm not really big on surprises, because I need to know like what's happening next, so that I can be prepared for it. Now, if I know that a surprise is coming, then I can prepare my surprise face and I can be ready for all that.
Which is why I can never surprise him.
But in terms of like a regular surprise, like it just doesn't work well for me, because even if I don't know what's coming, I'm not in the mode. Like I haven't moved into the box of being ready for the surprise. And so even when the surprise happens, it's like, oh, okay, cool. And then I got to kind of take a couple minutes to move into another box so that I can be excited and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, that's a really random tangent. So I have to know what's next. So as we're driving, like I'm starting to get frustrated because he's giving me directions at the last minute. And I hate being that person on the road that's like cutting over 4 lanes of traffic because I didn't know my exit was coming up. And I also, you know, being Black with all my misconceptions about Omaha, Nebraska, I didn't want to get pulled over by the cops. So I'm like, can you please tell me what's happening next so that I can be in the right lane to be able to take the right exits? And as I'm driving and I'm frustrated, I mean, like I'm squeezing the steering wheel because I'm getting so frustrated. And I very clearly hear the Holy Spirit say, just focus on the next turn. And I don't know if you ever like have these like full conversations in your head that happen within like a second and a half. But in that whole little conversation, it was like, just focus on the next turn, because it does you no good to know the next, you know, turns 2, 3, 4, and 5, because if you don't take the next turn, then none of those turns are going to matter. Mm-hmm. And it was like, just relax, enjoy the ride. and just focus on the next turn. Once you make that turn, then you'll find out what the next turn is. And I'm like, okay, like I get it, but it's still not super comfortable. And in that moment, I'm, applying it to the car ride, not understanding that I was getting set up. So we go to the Bob Carey pedestrian bridge and we're out walking on the bridge. It's a beautiful day. There actually aren't a lot of people out there that day, but Anthony had like really been hyping up the bridge like it was something that was super dope. And so I was like, okay, cool. We finna go out here and, stand in two states and, all this kind of stuff. And we get out there and I see this. And I'm like, okay, that's nice. But I was really underwhelmed. In a I don't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting a black line spray painted on some cement. It's but I mean it was cool to be able to stand in two states or whatever. But like I'm like this picture that you're looking at right now is the moment when I'm standing there on the bridge and I'm looking at that and I'm just like, this is so totally unimpressive. And again, in that moment, the Holy Spirit pops back in and is like, yeah, well, I'm equally unimpressed with man-made boundaries. And immediately I knew what the context of the conversation was, because as the words church on purpose were growing larger in my mind, I kept telling myself, like, dude, you can't start a church. You can't start a church. You're not even serving. I mean, you're the bass player at the church right now. Like, you're not even working in ministry. You can't lead. How you gonna fund it? Y'all struggling as it is. How's all that gonna work? You don't have the credentials to be able to do that. You don't have the education to be able to do that. You don't have this and you don't have that. And it was like, in that moment, it was just like, oh wow, like all the things that I was using as a determining factor to justify or validate my ability to do this was all criteria that were established by man. Mm-hmm. And so I'm standing there on the bridge and the Spirit is like, yeah, I'm equally unimpressed with man-made boundaries. And then like the conversation continues and was like, before there was ever a Nebraska or an Iowa, there was God. And it was like, before there was ever any kind of boundary between me and what I was being asked to do, God already existed. God's plan already existed. Yeah. He already had me conceived in his mind and he already knew what he was creating me to do. And so who am I to put a man-made boundary between who God made me to be and what he's asking me to do? Yeah. And it was in that moment where it was like, all right, dude, like you're either going to suck it up and you're going to say yes, or you're going to say no, and you're going to go back through this process again. Because one thing that the car ride also taught me was, because we, when we left the bridge, we were headed to the airport. I was nervous about missing my exit. And the Spirit was like, well, dude, if you miss the exit, that doesn't mean that you're never going to get to the airport. Mm-hmm. You're going to be delayed in arriving there, but it doesn't mean that you're never going to get there. You're just going to have to go down further, take another exit, come around, come back down, turn around again, and then come back and get back on and then take the right exit. So missing an exit in life doesn't mean that you're never going to get there. It just means that you're going to have to take another route, which is likely going to be longer. And in that moment, like I really felt the Holy Spirit saying, like, this is the opportunity for you to take the exit. This is the opportunity for you to do what I'm asking you to do. Now, if you don't do it in this moment, that doesn't mean that you'll never have the opportunity to do it, but you're going to have to go further down the road, get off somewhere else, turn around, come back up, get off again, turn back around, and then get back on this same road that you're already on so that you can take the exit that you're supposed to take. And Janae will tell you, I don't like wasting time. No. Especially when I'm in the car. No. I mean, we made a 90-minute drive yesterday that I had, and we had 2 hours to make this 90-minute drive, and I'm still doing 80 on the interstate. I don't know. I have no idea. I'm still like, anyway, I'm not gonna talk about my driving today. So, through this whole process, it's just like, all right, you have an opportunity to be able to do something really special right now. And then the conversation about the turns comes back, because it's like, now I'm asking, all right, well, Lord, if I do this, then where are the people going to come from? Where is the church going to be? How are we going to support the church? What is ministry going to look like? Blah, 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 blah. Like all these questions. And the Spirit is like, focus on the next turn,
Mm-hmm.
because none of that other stuff matters if you miss this turn. We could tell you what the church looks like, could tell you who's going to do it, could tell you where the fund is coming from. But if you don't make the decision to do it, then none of that stuff is going to matter. And it was like, why in the world would God tell me the whole plan if I haven't even committed to fulfilling the plan?
Yeah.
And so, let me just kind of pause right there for those of you that are kind of, still wrestling with the Lord about what he's asking you to do, and you want more information about what he's asking you to do and things of that nature. Like, at some point, you got to understand that there's no point in him giving you the details of the plan until you commit to the plan, until you commit to doing what it is that he's asking you to do. There isn't a lot of sense in him giving you the full plan. So, so I'm like, all right, Lord, I hear what you're saying, and I'm still wrestling, I'm still wrestling with my inadequacies up against like what I feel like the Lord is calling me to do. And I'm like, okay, cool. I need to make a decision before I leave. I just know, like, I have to make a decision before I get back home, because once I get back into that atmosphere, it's going to be too easy to fall back into my regular thinking patterns. And so while I'm in this space, I need to make a decision. So we get to the airport, I'm all stressed out about, missing the turn and all this other kind of stuff, and being late to the airport and all that kind of stuff. We get to the airport early, only to get there and find out that my flight is delayed. And as I'm standing there looking at my flight being delayed, again, the Holy Spirit is like, see, even when you put your best plans together, you still have no control over the outcome.
That is speak.
Mm-hmm. And in that moment, it was like, all right, look, you can sit here and you can try to piece everything together the way that you think it's supposed to look and the way that you want it to look. But at the end of the day, God has a plan, like we talked about on Sunday. God has provision at the necessary and designated point on your path. And if it ain't time, it ain't time. And you can plan all you want, but if it ain't time, it ain't time. You're going to have to sit down like I did and spend some more time thinking and prepare yourself for when they finally call your name. And so, while I'm sitting there in the airport, I'm like, all right, Lord, I'll plant the church. And so I get on the plane and I'm like, I'm still talking to the Lord. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna plant this church, but I'm gonna go home. I'm gonna talk to Janae about it. And I was like, Lord, you're gonna have to give me a sign to make it very clear that this is what you want me to do. And I get home and kind of get settled in the house, and we start talking about kind of my week and filling in the details. And then I tell her that I believe the Lord is calling us to plant a church. And she said,
okay.
Which was not the response that I was expecting at all. And I was like, oh, I guess this is the sign, because I was fully expecting her to provide a lot more resistance to the idea. Because even at that time, I didn't know what the Lord was doing in her heart as related to disconnecting from the church. And so when she said that, I was like, oh, wow, maybe this is like really legit. And I talked to my dad about it. And then, ended up later on in the week calling our pastor to talk to him about it. And, and the Lord just really reaffirmed what he had prepared us to do all throughout that week. And I'll pause right there and kind of give you some space to share your thoughts about that.
So, yeah, he came home, he asked me that question, and he was saying that he didn't know where. He was calling us to plant, even though he didn't know where. He was calling us to plant the church.
I didn't want to accept it.
So I'm thinking of, of course, he was, I'm thinking like, where should we be to be able to, like really minister to people? Like what area? The area that we were in, there were tons of churches like doing some amazing things in ministry. So I knew that was not going to be the area that we were going to be in because they were already doing those things. And again, like Jonathan, says all the time, we don't want to continue to do things that people are already doing. We want to push people to those things that people are doing instead of reproducing those things. And so I was like, oh man, what about, like Newport News or something like that? And
definitely kept throwing Newport News.
I did. One, because it was closer to my mama. Okay, let me stop. But anyway, so yeah, I brought that up to him, and he was like, I don't think so. I don't think that's the the place or whatever. So I'm like, Lord, all right.
She was real disappointed too.
All right.
I remember that.
All right, I'm gonna keep
she was slightly mad.
I was. Yeah. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna keep my thoughts to myself. And I'm just going to wait for him to tell me where we going. And then I'm going to pray on it. And if God say that's where we're going to go, then that's what we're going to do. Because of course he's the head of the household. And so God gives him the vision of what we should do with our household. And so I'm a believer in that. Although, aligning with one another and making sure that this is the right thing for both of us. But yeah, so I was disappointed. Later on, he came back in and kind of talked to us, talked to me about, what else was I thinking? And I couldn't think of anything else. And then,
Yeah, so we were back for about a week. What
did she say?
Your mother said she prayed too. So I was back for about a week, and that first week that I was back, it was my last week at work because I put my 2 weeks notice in before I left. So I was on vacation for the first week of my last 2 weeks, and then I was back at work for that last week. But Anthony and I were up on the phone every night that week until like 4 o'clock in the morning, and we were that's funny. I just cleaned the office today, and I put these right next.
Can you get to it?
Yeah. But we stayed up that night, writing out the vision of Church on Purpose on these poster boards, and I'll show this. I'll bring this so you guys can see this at some point. But this is literally the first scribbling of the vision of Church on Purpose. I'm so glad that the logo didn't end up looking like this. Edgar Smart was definitely a blessing in that arena, because that would have been trash. But yeah, I mean, like there's so much of who we are as a church today that is on this poster board. I mean, it's really crazy, and super exciting. And but we were up all that week fleshing out the concept of Church on Purpose, asking questions, answering questions, thinking about things, evaluating things. And at the end of that week, at the end of preparing this poster board, I'll never forget it. I sat at the kitchen table, which is where we were doing all this writing in the middle of the night. I sat at the table and I was like, we have to move to Omaha. And it was the craziest feeling ever, because I had only lived I was born in West Virginia, but only lived there for first 4 years of my life, and then spent the rest of my time in Virginia. And even travel wise, like in terms of the United States, I had never been. I've been to Florida like one time. My family we've been to Hawaii, but that's like something totally different. But in terms of like the lower 48, as they call them, I've never been anywhere like out west and all that kind of stuff. And so, we did go to San Jose that one time.
We did.
That
was pretty nice.
Yeah, for a convention.
Mm-hmm.
but that was kind of it. Like, it never really been there, and had absolutely never at any point in my life thought about living in Nebraska. Although, what is really interesting is when I was a kid, um, the first time I had my own room, I had a sweatshirt on my wall, and interestingly enough, it was a Nebraska Cornhuskers sweatshirt. Um, and that was around the time like Nebraska was pumping, and Eric Crouch and all that stuff. And um, so it was really crazy just like thinking about that in hindsight, but never had any kind of ideas about moving to Nebraska, and then having to like realize like all of my family, and we have a really relatively small close knit family, where she has a much larger family, still close knit, but realizing that we were going to be moving halfway across the country from everybody that we knew. And that was a very interesting prospect. And so sitting down and having that conversation, I think her face looked like a lot of other people's faces when we told them that we were moving to Nebraska.
Yeah, it was a punch in the gut. And anybody that knows me, I cry at the drop of a hat. So I had to suck back the tears because I knew that this was something that God had spoken to him and that he had to do and that he had to follow. And so it was interesting. I'm about to cry right now. But it was a very interesting time for us. I think up until the day of the going away party, well, not really party, but service or celebration at our church, that our church back at home through us, my family was really struggling with that. One, I was the baby of the family, the baby of 10 grandchildren, the only one that was really pretty much left in the central location that all the aunts could get to very quickly. The one that I took care of my parents. And so it was very difficult for them to understand how we could move, all the way across, the United States, not knowing, if I was going to get a job or if Jonathan was going to get a job, or pretty much anything, not knowing anybody, being there by ourselves, and them being able to see the struggles that we were already going through. And so Jonathan spoke about this last Sunday, how sometimes our families, and this is good, this is testimony time, but how our families sometimes can't see the direction in which God is taking us. And so they're blinded because they see what they see right now, but they don't see what could possibly happen in the future. And so it took them a minute to understand, like, God is calling us to do something that's not in this area. And the first person that came to me after that, which really touched my heart, was my sister, my big sister, because she came to me and she said, Janae, you have been so much to so many people. It's time for you to spread your wings. And if God has called Jonathan to go and start a church, then that's what he's called you to do. And everybody else has got to understand that. And I'm there with you, and so that meant a lot. My sister is like my other mother. And that meant a lot. And then the night of the presentation, the going away service or whatever, at the end of the night, my mom came and gave me a hug because she was really struggling with that. She came and gave me a hug and she said, baby, I am so proud of you. And I trust and I know that God will take care of you because he has planted something inside of Jonathan and inside of you that needs to blossom, that needs to grow. And so I'm okay. I'm okay. And so once I got that kind of confirmation, because I had been praying, y'all, and I mean praying, because it was a struggle, and he knew that I was struggling with it. Once I got that confirmation, I was fine. I was really at peace, and I knew that this was a move that we needed to make, because God was going to provide everything that we needed in order to move to Nebraska. And so, yeah, I'm sorry for crying. I'm just an emotional person. But just to say how things turn around for your good when God is involved in that. And God has to be involved in the situation to be able to lead and direct you. Just like Jonathan's like, I need to know what the next step is. I wanted to know what the next step was, because honestly, without my parents' blessings, well, my sister and my mother's blessing, I didn't know where I was going to be. And God made that happen because that was in his plan.
That's funny.
Yes, mommy, in his plan.
That's funny. So Janae skipped from August all the way to July. I think our commissioning service was in July.
Yes.
But I think that kind of interim time is really important to talk about too, because a lot of times we are, when we see the Lord calling people in scripture, it's like he calls them today, and then there's like a couple of verses, and then they're like doing what it is that he called them to do. And for us, it was, calling you go plant this church in Omaha, Nebraska. And then it's 9 to 10 months. Actually, it was 11 months from the time that I left until the time that we were on the road. So it was like 11 months of telling people that, of being Black people, telling people that we're moving to Omaha, Nebraska.
There are no Black people in Omaha, Nebraska.
And I mean, and it's crazy, just like the perceptions that the rest of the world has of Omaha, Nebraska, that we shared before we moved here. And so it's like, it's not only like people are excited that you're planting a church, and then you're like in Nebraska, and they're like, why in the world would you do that? Like who does that? And even today, like when we tell people about how we got here, they're always, they're like, where y'all from? Oh, we from Virginia. Oh, well, why'd you come here? Like, why would you do that? And it's just like, and we try to be polite, but it's just like, seriously, there is no way in the world that we would have moved to Omaha, Nebraska for any other reason besides the Lord told us to come here. And that was it was many months of that. And, people being excited for you in your face, but then hearing the conversations that went on when you weren't around. Just having to stay focused on the vision and believing what it was God said, and believing that if he said it, then it was his responsibility to provide for it. And transformative to my journey was this book, The Principles and Power of Vision by Dr. Miles Monroe. I'm not 100% confident that I would have found the footing to stay committed to the process over those 11 months if I had not read that book. Because every question, every fear, every doubt, every reservation that I had, the Lord spoke through Dr. Monroe to give me scripturally based comfort, correction in certain places where it was needed, and clarity. And I try to read that book at least once every year, because once you start the vision, it's not complete overnight. And so we still need recentering and refocusing along the journey. And that book is a tremendous resource. And so if you haven't read it and you're pursuing your vision, then please check out The Principles and Power of Vision by Dr. Miles Monroe, a tremendous resource. Go ahead.
I think during that time before we moved, Jonathan set up something with one of the young ladies that went to our church back at home. Her roommate, because I saw Courtney chime in, her roommate was from Omaha, Nebraska. Go figure, right? Crazy. So after I don't know how long Jonathan had been trying to get her to come over and have dinner and us sit down and, kind of chit chat about, Omaha, Nebraska.
It was 3 months.
Courtney, he just put you out there. But yeah, so we sat down and we finally got to talk to her and ask her about, the area, like, is there really Black people in Omaha, Nebraska? I wanted to know that, first of all, because we were bringing our children.
Like, you don't blend in anyway.
I mean, I'm just saying, I know I'm transparent, but I'm still, anywho, whatever. So we got to meet this wonderful young lady, and she kind of explained, Omaha, Nebraska to us, gave us some great information for us to, kind of chew on and think about. So thank you, Courtney, for those very strong words about, about Omaha and what Omaha needed, because we truly listened to you.
It was very helpful, very insightful. And I think what is, again, just kind of seeing the amazing way that God was working, not having any clue that she would end up back in Omaha herself. And but during that conversation, I'll never forget, one of the things that she kept pointing on and really resting on was the need for attention to the youth of Omaha, and somebody to tell them that there's more to life than just the limiting beliefs that they have here, and that that there's more than they can do. There's more places to be able to go. There's more contribution that they can make. Like, I'll never, like, one of the very clear things she said, she was like, if you're gonna go start a church in Omaha, don't worry about the adults because they already set in their ways. Just focus on the kids and try to help them. The amazingness, I was going to say the irony of it, but it's not irony, it's purpose and plan, is that here 4.5 going on 5 years later, she's not only a member of the church and a leader at the church, but she's leading our teen and high school ministries. And so what even then she was so passionate about and saw as such a need in our community, now as a part of the church, she's in position to be able to help address that need. And that, y'all, is the beauty of how God works in purpose. Purpose provides a path for partnership. I am killing these peas this week.
You are.
But purpose provides a path for partnership. When you're clear about your purpose, then other people are able to take the purpose that God is working out in them, and they're able to see, okay, well, I can do that to help support that, to help get that further down the road. And that's all the concept of submission is. Mm-hmm. Like, we talk about submission in church, and it's just like, oh, you need to submit. That don't mean like you need to be a dummy and be a slave and just do whatever somebody else tells you. But that means that you take your mission and you make it a sub mission. You bring your mission under this mission to help support it and to help advance it. And within that, the major mission, the I can't even think of the word, the premier mission, provides both covering, provision, and protection for the fulfillment of your mission. And that's the way that all of that works together. It's not about, people partnering with Church on Purpose and you come to the church and just doing whatever I tell you to do. That's stupid. Why is another person going to tell you what to do with the life that God has given you when he has given you the same spirit that he's given me, that empowers you and stirs up your gifts and gives you vision and gives you insight and understanding to be able to make a difference in the world and fulfill the Great Commission? Why would he put all of that in me and make that contingent on me? Like, that doesn't make sense. No, like, us coming together under the mission of Church on Purpose is taking the mission that God has given us individually and saying, I can use what I'm committed to. Mm-hmm. I can use what I'm purposed to do. I can use what I'm passionate about, and I can partner it with these other people in this avenue. And I can benefit from the protection. I can benefit from the provision, from the resources that I can access there that I can't get anywhere else, from the, the human resources, the financial capital. I can utilize those to help advance the mission that God has given me, that's in alignment with advancing the mission of the church.
Yeah.
And I think like her life is such a beautiful example of that, because even before she had even committed her life, even before she had even agreed to be a member of the church, the Lord already had that passion in her heart for the young people in our community. And he was able to bring us here to provide that platform and that space for her to then bring that mission under, to be able to make it live. And that's my prayer for each and every one of you that are part of Church on Purpose, that we will be able to utilize what we are building together to make sure that everybody has space to be able to pursue their vision. That everybody has what they need to be able to make the difference in our community that needs to be made. Mm-hmm. And that's not always going to be led by the church as a whole. Some of that is going to be supporting work that you do outside of the church, that the church doesn't get any credit or any recognition for. And that's totally okay, because at the end of the day, it's not about the church. It's about the kingdom. Mm-hmm. And God is working in more places in Omaha, Nebraska than just Church on Purpose. I'm glad he's working at Church on Purpose, but he's working in other places too. And we just want to be wherever he is, wherever he's working, that's where we want to be. Yeah, I don't know how I ended up down that rabbit hole, but hopefully it was a blessing to you. It's 7:43. We're going to take about 10 more minutes and then we're going to try to wrap it up. This conversation is taking a lot longer than what I thought it was. So we might have to come back for a part 2 next week. I don't know. If you want us to come back for a part 2 next week, tell you the rest of the story, drop it in the chat. But there are some elements of that period that, again, that period between when we made the commitment to plant and when we shared that with other people, and the time that we left. And really central to that was depending on God's provision. Mm-hmm. Because again, like I told you, I put my 2 weeks notice in before I left to come to Omaha with the mindset that I was going to come back and I was going to start this business. Well, coming back from Omaha, committing to plant the church, like ain't nobody thinking about business no more after that. Like right. All of my time, all of my energy, all my effort was going into figuring out what this church was going to look like and how we were going to be able to transform people's lives, and researching and learning about Omaha, because we never wanted to be those people that moved to a place that we didn't know and showed up on the scene and acted like we had all the answers. Mm-hmm. Like everybody that was there and had been doing work was a dodo and didn't know what they were doing. Like we never wanted to be those people. And so we already knew that like we weren't going to show up in Omaha on Monday and then plant the church on Tuesday. We had to get in the community and learn about the community to figure out where we fit and how we could make a unique contribution to the community. And so like while all that is going on, obviously I ain't making no money from my business. Now I done quit my job to start this business, and now I'm not making no money from my business. Thank God I'm playing the bass of the church. And so, I'm still making a couple $100 a Sunday, to bring home and to be able to get things together. But those 11 months were tough. Mm-hmm. I would say that they were comparable to our first 11 months, where we lost the job, had the baby, went through all that kind of stuff. Because during that 11 months between having the baby of the church, the vision of the church, and leaving, it was tough. I mean, just trying to be able to, trying to pay bills, trying to steward our resources. I mean, it was so rough that at one point I was at one point we went like a whole month where we ain't had no lights at the house. And so I was at the house, but I told Janae that she needed to take the kids and go stay with her mom. And it just worked out in terms of optics for everybody else. It just worked out that her mom had just had a procedure. And so it was like, go to your mama house, stay at your mama house and take care of your mama and take the kids with you. And I'm going to stay here and I'm gonna keep working on stuff. I'm gonna keep working and everything. And we're going to we gonna figure this out. We're gonna figure out how to get the bill paid and get the lights back on and all that kind of stuff. And so it was 27 days that I stayed in that house by myself with no power. And you want to talk about a humbling experience. It's tough sitting there in the room in the dark at night and saying, all right, Lord, like, you finna move us halfway across the country and we can't even pay our light bill here. So what's going on? And that was a really tough moment. But during that time, the Lord, it was through that experience that the Lord clarified for me what provision for the vision looks like. And a lot of times when we pray and we ask God to provide, we are expecting him to write a check in heaven and drop it in our mailbox. We're expecting him to transfer $4,000 into our bank account, just out of the blue without anybody else knowing. We want God to provide for our lack in a way that doesn't let anybody else know about our lack.
Yeah.
Like we want to be secretive about it. We don't want nobody to know that we don't have what we need, because we have adopted this mindset that to be in need, to be in want is some kind of failure on our part. And granted, like, there's definitely some ownership that we have to take in that. But sometimes the ownership is that we have not accessed the resources that God has available to us and the provision that he makes available to us through the people that are connected to his spirit. Because what ended up happening is we ended up, eventually one of my best friends, he ended up finding out, I think he popped by the house one day. He ended up finding out that I was living in the house with no lights and that my wife and my kids was over at my mother-in-law's house. And he was like, "Stupid, bring your wife and your kids back home." And I was like, that sounds like a really great idea. But it ain't finna happen today. And he was like, well, what do you need? And I told him, and like, by that time we had, the lights had been off for so long that we had incurred additional fees. And I think like the total balance of the light bill was like over $800. They had closed the account. So, I couldn't even, like, the account was closed. Even if I paid the balance off, I'd have to reopen it by paying a deposit and all this other kind of stuff. And it was May. So we only had a couple of months left. So, it was a bunch of crazy stuff. He got together with some other members from our church and some members from his family. They pulled their resources, paid our bill, and got our lights turned back on. And it was through that experience that the Lord helped me to understand that the way that he was going to provide was not going to be manna from heaven. It wasn't going to be this mysterious sprinkling of money that comes out of the blue. Don't nobody know where it came from. Don't nobody know where it went. But it was going to be through the people that he guided by his spirit for them to pour into and provide for the vision that he had given us. Like, that's how God provides for the vision. He uses the people that are connected to his kingdom to pour into us, to make the provision. And so if you still sitting out there, you waiting on the Lord to provide, but you sitting in isolation and you ain't open your mouth, then you are missing out on the ways that the Lord wants to provide for you. Yeah. But like I said, there's ownership in there, because it's not only about just sharing what is, what you need, but it's also the responsibility of properly stewarding what you receive. Yeah. Because ain't nobody gonna keep giving to you and you need something every 5 minutes, because obviously you're not managing it well, and eventually people just gonna stop throwing money at you. But people are willing to invest in you when they believe that you are good soil. And so, along your journey of vision and purpose, if you are walking in obedience to what the Lord has called you to do, and you are at a point where you need provision and you don't see it, the question is, have you opened your mouth?
Right. Speak.
Because if you are walking in obedience and you're walking in God's purpose, then like we talked about on Sunday, when God had you begin that journey, he already had the necessary provision established along your path.
Yeah.
But sometimes the person that is holding on to the provision doesn't know that they're holding on to it for us.
Mm-hmm.
And so I pray that you have been encouraged through this conversation tonight. It's 7:52. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up, and hadn't planned on doing this, but we'll go ahead and plan to come back next week and carry the journey a little bit further, because we haven't even talked about the day that Quentin and Priscilla told us that they were going to come with us to plant the church. We haven't talked about what things were like when we first started the church in the basement and those kind of things. And so there's so much more to this journey that we want to share with you. And so we'll plan to come back next Wednesday and share some more of the journey. So I'll let you give your final thoughts, and then I'll offer some wrap up, and then we'll be done.
So I'll say to all those that are second guessing yourself, and for those that are saying, that you're not worth it, that God hasn't put X, Y, and Z inside of your heart or giving you the tools that you need. He has given you everything that you needed. Every trial that you go through is a lesson. And so what we have to do is ask, what's the lesson that we need to learn? Because once we learn that lesson, we can apply it to our life. We can use those tools, take those tools out of the tool bag when it comes that opportunity that God is like, take this right turn. And you need to use X, Y, and Z, these tools that I've already given you. And so you'll have those aha moments because you haven't arrived, but you've arrived to that first destination that God wants you to be at. And you can say, oh my gosh, I am here. Why? Because I listened to the Holy Spirit and I allowed God to direct me. And I say, for this whole journey leading up to us moving to Omaha was truly a journey, mentally, physically, dealing with our relationship. A lot of things that we didn't deal with in the beginning of our relationship allowed us to deal with it during this time, which strengthened us.
You're starting to get into the part of the story where we get to
Okay.
Omaha.
I'm sorry.
Get into next week's stuff.
But
ain't nobody asked for no previews.
Whatever. You just gave a preview.
Well, I had to set it up, but I mean, you get into details.
He got me over here about to clap. Okay, I'm not gonna clap. But I'll just leave it at this. Just trust God in the journey. Oftentimes we get sidetracked on the things that are happening with other people because we're like, oh, we should be right there. But trust God in the path in which He is taking you through. And spending time in prayer, for the most part, spending time in prayer, we like to talk a whole lot. So we don't spend that time to be able to listen and to allow God to speak to us, whether it is through music, whether it is through a random lady at Wendy's or wherever they went to the fast food restaurant, just speaking to them, allowing God to speak through people, to speak to us. We need to be able to do that, but we need to have a relationship with Him in order for us to be in tune with the Holy Spirit. I'm gonna leave it at that.
Good job. So crazy enough, we talked a lot more about different aspects of the journey tonight than what we've shared in the past. And, hopefully you've heard something that was a blessing to you. But know that even with what we shared tonight, there's even so much more that God did in between all of that was just mind blowing. And so I say that to say this. We are not here by accident, but in fact, we are here on purpose. And God doesn't move people halfway across the country to be mediocre. And we are not going to be a mediocre church. The Lord has intentionally connected each of you with this body because you have something to bring to this work that nobody else could bring. And this year, as we walk through this journey with our theme for this year, who are you? Part of that, who are you understanding, is going to be understanding who you are as a member of this church and what it is you are going to do, how you are going to avail yourself for the Lord to transform the part of our community that you are responsible for. We are in this together. We are going to do this together. And when it's done, the same way that people were shocked and amazed that we were moving halfway across the country, they're going to be equally shocked and amazed at what they see the Lord do through his people here in Omaha, Nebraska. So we love you guys. Shout out to mother-in-law, Diana Bennett. Mother, we love you. Thank you for joining us
Love
and
you, Mommy.
hold down the chat on Facebook this evening. I saw my big sister Heather commented as well. Love you, fam. Thank you to all of you that hopped on and just sat and listened to us talk tonight. Y'all didn't have too many questions, but I guess well, hopefully it was a blessing to you. But like I said, we'll go ahead and plan to come back and continue the conversation and actually talk about like the move to Omaha and then kind of what things were like that first year before we got started with the church and all that kind of stuff. And we're excited to be able to share with you some more of the wonderful things that God did along our journey. Mm-hmm. But know that, God has done equally amazing stuff in your life as well. So let's make it happen, y'all. We love you. God bless you. And we pray that God would continue to be with you as you go through this week, living each day on purpose.
Love you guys.